So now that we have a main view model, let's see if we can call or instantiate our main view model so we can actually see something, hopefully. All right. So before we do that, let's go back to the main navigation. So again, so Control Command or Control E, right? And I'm going to say navigation. Let's see, navigation. There we go, weather navigation. For this to work, we need to, of course, pass around our main view model through our composable here. Okay. So it's very simple. All I do, I'm going to create a val called view. It's called main view model as such. Oops. Main view model. It's a view model type. I'm going to say hilt view model as such, and then we need to pass the type in the angled brackets as such. So this is going to be main view model like this. Okay, so then this main view model, we're going to pass it through or around. I'm going to say view model, main view model as such, and then we'll need to add parameter in main screen of our view model. So if you go there now, command click, you can see view model is added as such. And what we're going to do, we're going to instantiate it right away. Let's say hilt view model like this. But before we move forward, there's something that I've noticed. When we look at our object, let's go back. We're passing this weather object as the type for our data or exception, the actual data. Let's look at it. This is the wrong one to pass around. The reason being is because we want to receive this whole payload. Now, if you look at the weather object, we have description, icon, ID, and main. That's not exactly what this represents. That will represent this actual weather object that is inside of this weather array or list. So that's not what we are expecting to receive. Right away, it just tells me that I've made a mistake and we need to rectify that. How do we do that? Well, let's go to start with the repository. What we want to do, we want to make sure that instead of weather object, we need to pass something else. Let's go back to our models. Let's look at our weather. Right, this is the payload that we need to pass or receive, which then in our list, in this case, is going to be a list of weather objects. So if you go here, you'll see that we have this list which contains this payload here, this object containing all of the information, right? DT, temps, and so forth, which is exactly what we want, weather item. So if you command click, this is that payload. Okay, and then we have a weather which has that weather object list there. So this is the structure, right? My mistake, that's okay. At least we've looked at it before a disaster. So let me get rid of that. So anywhere else where we're passing the data or exception, instead of a weather, we're going to pass the weather like that. Okay, we're going to have some problems. That just means we're going to go to get weather, and instead of weather object, it's also going to be weather, right? Weather class. Let's see what else. Let's get rid of that. We have weather object. We don't need that. And repository. It's weather. That's very good. So let's go ahead and run real quick just to make sure we're not going to see anything really changing much, but at least we want to make sure that we didn't break the app. There's one that I'm missing here. Let's go up here, weather object, right. Let's change that to weather. Okay, let's run again. All right, so there we go. Everything is set up. At least we know that the types that we are receiving, it's the correct type, which will resemble this entire payload, not just what's inside. All right, so let's go ahead and test to see if we can get something from our API. So we're still inside our main here. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create another composable here, just a test composable. And I'm going to say fun show data as such. we'll get to that. And I'm going to get all of that and cut all of that and put there. Okay. And inside here, this is what I'm going to call the show data, which is testing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually pass our main view model as such, and then we'll have to add that show the main view model into our show data. Okay. So inside here is where we are going to check to see, actually to get our main view model and see if we can get some data. Now, because the way we structure our view model, you notice that here we have this mutable state that's wrapped inside of, actually we have this data or exception that's wrapped inside of multiple state. In order for this to work, we'll have to make sure that we produce that state, right, in our view model, or in this case in our main screen, so that we can get the data that we need. What I mean by that is as follows. So in this case here, I'm going to have to say val, let's call this weather data as such, and I'm going to invoke to produce state as such. Now the initial value of this produce state is going to be something I want to add in a second. Now before we move forward, I'm going to pass the type that this produce state will have to expect, which is going to be our data or exception type like this, and it's going to be a weather type first, and a boolean, and an exception E, like that. Okay, very good. And so we'll continue. Our initial value here is going to be data or exception, and I'm going to pass loading to be true. Okay, and then for our producer here, because it's the last function that has been passed, I'm going to just use lambda, trailing lambda. So inside here, this is where the state is produced. In fact, you can see this is the produce state scope, which is going to be a data or exception type that we're going to be setting up or getting here. So I'm going to say value. Notice the value is going to be passed implicitly, which is going to be the type, which is going to be data or exception type. Okay, so how do we get that? We're going to set that. Well, I'm going to use view model that we're getting, main view model that is, and I'm going to go ahead and say dot data like this and get the value. Very good. And then of course I'm going to go and say get the value, the actual value, to finalize our weather data. Very good. So now it's this weather data, it's going to be a state that has been produced by calling produce state, and we pass all of this information. Okay, and the initial value is going to be loading, because we're saying data exception, loading is true. And then we are passing our main view model, get the data, right, and then pass that into this value inside of this produce state, and then we invoke dot value to get the actual value once the state has been produced, which should have some information. So next, what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and put inside of an if statement. I'm going to say if weather data dot loading is true, what we're going to do, I'm going to put a circle progress indicator, else if, in this case, weather data, that data, the actual weather object, is not null as such, then in this case I'm just going to go ahead and cut that and put that inside, and I'm just going to say here weather data, and let's just say two strings. So it's just going to get the data object and put it into a string. In fact, let's go even further. Let's say data, let's get city and get the country. Okay, we'll need to wrap it all to make it work like that. All right, so show data is being called there inside where we have instantiated, of course, our main view model. Let's see if this works. Let's go ahead and run. All right. right, looks like it keeps running and running, and we don't know when it stops. Okay, let's stop this, and maybe let's do some debugging. We see nothing. Let's go to our log cat, and we can see that our get weather, let's see, this is from our weather. Let's see what this will say. It shows nothing, but somewhere in our main view model we say get. We're not getting any, we're getting something, but it says null, right? We're not getting anything. What's the problem? Okay, let's go to our main repository, because this is where everything happens, really, the layer that connects to the actual retrofit. And inside of our exception here, let's see if we can log something, the exception that may happen, because something is not right. Let's pass it E. Just put something gibberish like this, so to differentiate. And let's run this. Hopefully we can see the log, see if something is not right, or what is it that is not right. Okay, very good. So looking at our logs, it says Rex, this is what we have. And we have a problem. It says JSON syntax exception, Java lang number exception, expected int, but was 0.78. Okay, so looks like we have some issues in our data models that is expecting a different type, but it's getting something different. What I usually like to do, let's copy this 0.78, and we know that our main view, in our main view model, we're passing Seattle. That's what we should get. Let's go to our payload here, and it is Seattle. Very good. And what I'm going to do is say Command F to find, and I'm going to paste that 0.78. Okay, so now I see I have this pop. This is the field which is inside of one of these list, right? Object is actual weather. So that means then, let's look in our data, in our models I should say, to see what type do we have set for pop. Okay, because that seems to be the problem. It says here Java lang number format exception, expected an int, but found in this case a double. Let's go to our models and let's click weather. That's not where the pop is. Weather item. Aha, so there's pop. Pop here is somehow an int, but what is being expected is actually a double. So that means then we need to change this. I don't know what happened. Sometimes happens. The plugin probably fetched the wrong type, and it was added an int instead of a double. That was the problem. Okay, well, I hope that was the problem. That was the only problem. And let's go ahead and run again to see if this is going to be solved, and hopefully we can see something. And voila. So even though this keeps going, that's fine. It looks like we have a winner here. Something is now working, which is good. So we're getting the correct payload. We get the city, and everything is good. All right, so now we're getting the information we want. So let's go from this inside, just inside. Voila, it's working. Okay, let's ignore this for now. In fact, we could stop all together. And that means then in our view model, this is being called, actually in our repository, this has been called, and we're getting the data. Perhaps in our view model, let's see, get weather. Okay, also get weather is still null, but that's fine. It's probably because we're outside. That's okay. So we're able to get that information, which is exactly what we want. Now we see we have a little problem here. The problem is that when we use our weather data, we are invoking main view model.data, and this data here is actually this val, which is mutable state that we created earlier, and so forth. So we have a little problem here because things are not being set up the way we want. First of all, at this point, this data is going to be empty, or it's going to be null, because we inside of this get value or get weather, and we pass the city, and we have the view model scope and so forth. And when we log this data value, it is indeed null. That's why you see that we always get weather, which is this get weather, or rather either one of these, we get that null. Now, to simplify our lives, because this would work in different circumstances, especially for testing, and we don't want that. To simplify our lives, because all we want to do is to invoke the get weather data and pass the city and so forth and go from there. What we can do instead, I'm going to get rid of all of this. Yes, I know, but it's okay. Instead of what I'm going to do, get rid of all of that, as I said. Let's stop this so we don't see that happening there. And also I'm going to get rid of this as well. And all I'm going to do, I'm going to put a suspend function here, such called get weather data, like this. I'm going to pass a city. It's going to be a string. And this is going to return a data or exception. It's going to be weather object, essentially what we had before, boolean and exception. Okay. All right. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to say return like this, repository, weather repository, invoke the get weather and pass the city or city query and pass our city that's been passed. And there we go. This is much simpler because we know that when we call get weather data, it's going to return the type that we want, which is much easier to deal with than what we had before. And it simplifies everything. And now when we go to our main screen, this should work, but we have to change a few things. Notice ViewModel.data no longer works because we don't have that variable. Okay. Instead, we're going to go ahead and call that get weather and pass the city. In this case, I'm just passing Seattle, right, to start with. And now everything else stays the same. And voila, main screen, USA. That's wonderful. So now it works perfectly, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so very simple. We have to get weather, pass city. It's going to return a type, which is easier to grasp because remember, even in our main screen here, when we say weather data get the produce state, right, we're expecting a type that has been passed along. So it's easier to deal with instead of going straight to a field that we had added before at the top here. So this is much easier, and I believe this is the best way to do what we want to do. And now you can see we can get that object. In fact, if I go to main screen here, I can get more than that. Let's just go and get data, that to string, so we can see the whole thing per se. Let's go ahead and run. I guess I didn't have to add to string, but it's okay. Very good. Voila. Now I'm able to get the entire payload. I can't scroll up and down because it's just, I don't have a column, in this case a lazy column, but now I get the whole thing, right? The whole payload, which is exactly what we need, what we want. This is not helpful, of course, but you can see that things are actually working. All right? Even if I change this to, let's say, Moscow, as you can see, it says Moscow, it's in Russia, and so forth. So what was changed here, let's say Portland. Now I have to run this. And voila, you can see US, Portland, population, and all the data that we want. Wonderful. So it is indeed working. We had to tweak a few things, we had to debug a few things, but that's what we do as developers. So make sure, I hope you were able to get to see at least some data showing, which is very important because now that we have the data, we can do all sort of things.